Jonathan Schein with IREI, and this is our View from the Top video series featuring CEOs from our sponsoring firms. And today we have Robert Bellinger, President and CEO of ASB Real Estate Investments. Welcome, Robert.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So let me ask you, let's talk about building a viable platform. We've been through many downturns. Not many, but the last one was pretty dramatic. What does it take to create a business that has weathered some of these downturns?
Well, I would say many. I think one starts as being many. I think for anybody that's been through one, that's enough. But I believe that at ASB, we actually thrive in the downturns, and that's when we've really been, I think, at our best. And so I do believe that we've built a platform that not only can weather the storm through tough times, but actually even get better. And we've got a track record in our Allegiance, our core fund, that has consistently ranked in the top quartile of the managers in the index during both the good markets and the bad markets, which is, I think, pretty unusual for funds in the index. You have some that have done very well during the good times, and others have been sort of very solid during the bad. And we've been consistently at the top in both. And if you actually look at, I think it's interesting to look at the 7-year return number, because the start of that right now is the very beginning of the downturn, January 1 of 2008. And over that 7-year period ending just this last December, our Allegiance Fund had the highest return of any fund in the open-end fund NCREIF index. And so that shows us going through the tough times during the downturn and then back up. And I think the keys to success for that really are mostly that as our firm, we've tried to be extremely focused on a couple of things. And focus, I think, is how you really ultimately generate great investment performance.
So when you talk about downturns or off-market cycles are also positive for you, does that mean that ASB is more of a counterintuitive investor?
I think that, look, downturns, when times are great, everybody looks pretty good, right? And we're no different, right? But during downturns, that's when you're really tested. And actually, the last downturn was so tough. I've never seen such a spread in returns amongst the best performing funds and the worst performing funds as we did during the 2008-2009 tough time. And look, I think that one key to success there is I have no idea when the next downturn's coming.
We never do.
You always have to be ready as though it's going to happen tomorrow. And to do that, you've got to be vigilant and frankly not spend too much time thinking about your successes. Steve Jobs used to say, success leads to laziness, and laziness leads to complacency, and complacency leads to failure. And you can never obviously get lazy or complacent, and always got to be at the top of your game. And if you find yourself, you've got a couple of assets that you want to sell, right, but you keep putting it off, and the downturn, I've got time before bad times come, or I've got too much debt over here, but I've got time to deal with that. I think that you just can't let that happen. You've always got to be ready. And I think critical to that is having a great sales discipline. And I think that we don't talk about that enough in our industry. We love to talk about the deals we're buying. And real estate people, I don't think in general are good sellers, because they get so emotionally tied to their real estate, and they have a hard time seeing the warts, seeing where things aren't going well. And I think it starts with, you've got to have the humility to admit when you've made a mistake, and then, just as tough, you've got to have the courage to do something about it. And that's how you can become a great seller. And we were a tremendously active seller during the 2006, 7, and early 8 period, which really helped us to weed our portfolio. And this market, frankly, is no different. It's become a real seller's market. And if we don't love an asset, if we don't think it's a great asset for us, then we're going to look at selling it.
So when discussing this type of strategy with your team, what is the number one consideration that you want everyone on your team to stay focused on?
It starts with generating great investment performance, and the list ends there. That has got to be your number one top goal at all times. And everything you do as a company has to flow from that. And building assets under management can't even enter the equation because it's generating exceptional investment performance within, of course, the guardrails of the risk parameters that your investors are comfortable with. If it's a core mandate or a value add or an opportunistic, and I think focusing on investment performance, if you can be true to that and execute on it, then ultimately your business will be successful.
And part of that is communication, both internally and externally. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, in terms of internally, you've got to beat the drum every day, and you've got to live it and lead by example, and have a culture that embraces the concept of we're going to focus on generating great returns for our investors, and sales discipline is a big part of it. We talked about being vigilant and being ready, admitting to your mistakes, having a culture, we call it a culture of debate, where no one is afraid to speak up, because the canary in the coal mine is one of the greatest assets you can have on your side in the investment business. And we talked earlier about the importance of sales and a sales discipline. If you can prevent what will become $100 million loss and disaster, if you can figure that out when you've only lost $5 million, in a strange way, I feel like you've made $95 million, right? Because
yes,
you've avoided that loss, and then you can take that money and put it into a better investment that will earn a good return for you.
So look, that's quite interesting, actually, a way of hedging that, right? So looking forward, where do you see the greatest opportunities and threats?
I think that things feel great right now, which probably worries me a little bit, right? Because everybody thinks that we're heading in a terrific direction. It certainly feels that way. Employment growth is as good as it's ever been. Office absorption had at its best year since the downturn last year. Retail rents in an urban setting, and we're exclusively urban investors, so that is our focus. Our retail urban rents have been on fire. Market rents increasing by double digits, and so certainly things feel good right now. I think that we will ultimately get hit by something we're not expecting, and there are a couple of significant events, and the unintended consequences are very hard to predict, that recently are, I think, going to have a significant impact. Obviously, the rapid drop in energy prices, which appears good for most people unless you're an energy producer or owner, but that's going to have a big impact on the economy, and the significant upswing in the value of the dollar will have a big impact also, and ultimately the geopolitical ramifications, I think, of both of those events. They're global big events that will impact not only economies but also politics, which ultimately will impact us here at home, I think, in the real estate market.
And finally, just in closing, looking back now, would you have done anything differently, or what would you have done differently, whether personally or professionally?
What would I have done differently? I'll say this: we every day try to get better at what we do, and be humble about who we are, and know that we can always get better. And in the last downturn, I wish I'd been better, frankly, and hopefully for the next one I will be. And to do that, you've got to be able to be, frankly, critical of yourself in a constructive way, right? And keep trying to get better at what you do. I do think that for us, one thing that has really helped us to do that is we're super focused not only on investment performance, right, but on our product array.
Okay.
And we have one core open-end fund. Every great idea we have in the core space goes into that fund. We have over 300 investors in that fund. All their interests are aligned, And that's the fund that I focus on, and every morning I get up, I'm thinking about it. And similarly, in the opportunistic space, we have one fund series called the Meridian Fund, and our feeling is we'd rather be crazy great at those two things than good at many.
Okay.
And I think that is a lesson learned, that I think there are funds, managers who had many funds to manage through tough times. And I don't know how you can keep your focus if you have multiple products across a broad array. It dilutes your best talent. It's tough not to revert to the mean, frankly, and become average, which is just not something we're interested in being. That's still fun.
That's great. Well, Robert Bellinger, President and CEO, ASB Real Estate Investments, View from the Top. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.